The night sky above New York City glowed red, not with the familiar neon hum of the metropolis, but with fire. Explosions lit up the heavens as alien ships descended like malevolent angels, tearing through human defenses with ruthless precision. Within hours, humanity's most advanced weapons were rendered useless, their soldiers crushed like ants beneath the boots of giants. "This is not a drill!" Captain Elias Drake shouted over the cacophony of screams and blaring alarms. He sprinted through the crumbling remains of his naval base, dragging a wounded private behind him. "Get to cover! Now!" The private, barely conscious, clutched his bleeding leg. "Sir, what are they?" Drake looked skyward, his jaw tightening. Towering Krelth warships hovered ominously above, their sleek black frames absorbing the light. Pulses of green energy rained down, obliterating buildings and vaporizing anyone caught in their path. "Not friendly," he muttered grimly. The attack had begun without warning. At 2:13 a.m. GMT, the world's power grids flickered, then collapsed. Communications were severed moments later. By dawn, Krelth ships had appeared over every major city, unleashing a coordinated assault. Drake's base in Virginia was among the first to fall. The Krelth didn't negotiate. Their ships unleashed energy cannons that turned tanks into molten slag and soldiers into ash. Those who weren't killed outright were rounded up, some for slave labor, others for experiments. Drake had witnessed the experiments firsthand during a failed rescue mission earlier that day. The screams of his comrades, twisted and dissected by Krelth bioscientists, haunted his every step. As he and the private reached the relative safety of a bombed-out hangar, Drake slumped against the wall, panting. A handful of survivors, soldiers, technicians, and civilians, huddled in the shadows. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with fear. "Captain," whispered a young woman clutching a rifle too big for her slight frame. "What do we do?" Drake scanned the group. They were broken, terrified, but they were alive. "We fight," he said firmly. The woman shook her head. "Fight with what? They tore through our defenses like tissue paper. They're not like us." "That's why we fight," Drake countered. He pointed to the sky. "They think they're better than us, stronger, smarter. And yeah, right now they are, but we've got something they don't." "What's that?" someone asked skeptically. Drake's voice hardened. "Nothing to lose." Suddenly, a deafening crash shook the hangar. The ceiling split open, revealing a massive Krelth drone descending into the room. Its metallic limbs clicked as it scanned the survivors with glowing red eyes. "Scatter!" Drake roared, shoving the private out of harm's way. The drone unleashed a beam of energy, slicing through the hangar and disintegrating 2 civilians instantly. Drake dove behind a crate, fumbling for his sidearm. "Draw its fire!" he ordered, firing uselessly at the machine. The young woman with the oversized rifle took aim, her hands shaking. "Eat this, you alien bastard!" she screamed, pulling the trigger. The bullet ricocheted harmlessly off the drone's armor, but it distracted the machine long enough for Drake to flank it. Spotting a damaged fuel line on the drone's underside, Drake grabbed a nearby crowbar and lunged. He wedged the crowbar into the breach, prying it open. Sparks flew as the drone spasmed, then exploded in a shower of metal and flame. The survivors stared at the smoldering wreckage, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. "That was just one drone," the young woman whispered. "There are thousands of them out there." Drake wiped soot from his face, his expression grim. "Then we'll take down 1,000 of them if we have to. We don't die here. Not today. Hours later, as night fell, Drake stood on a rooftop overlooking the ruins of the city. The Krelth ships cast long shadows over the devastation. He gripped a stolen Krelth communicator in his hand, listening to their cold, guttural language. Assimilation of species 3247 underway. A voice crackled through the device. Earth will be pacified within 72 hours. Resistance is irrelevant. Drake's jaw clenched. He clicked the communicator off and turned to his ragged group of survivors. They think this is over, he said. But it's just getting started. Above them, the alien ships continued their relentless bombardment. But for the first time since the invasion began, Drake felt a flicker of hope. The Krelth didn't understand humans. Not really. And that ignorance might just be their downfall. We'll show them, he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. We'll show them what it means to be human. The air was heavy with the stench of ash and death as Captain Elias Drake crouched behind a shattered car, scanning the ruined city block ahead. He motioned for the young woman beside him, Lena Carver, to stay low. Another patrol, Drake whispered. A hulking Krelth drone stomped into view, its limbs clicking mechanically as it scanned the street with blood-red sensors. Behind it marched 2 Krelth soldiers, their pale, sinewy forms clad in shimmering black armor. Each held a staff-like weapon, the tip of which glowed ominously. We can't keep doing this, Lena murmured, her voice trembling. Hiding, running, it's not enough. Drake glanced at her, noticing how tightly she gripped her rifle. Her knuckles were white, her face streaked with soot and tears. She was young, too young for this kind of war, but so was everyone left standing. We'll do more than run, Drake said. But first, we survive. The group of survivors, now 10 strong, had found refuge in an old subway tunnel. It was damp and dark, the smell of mildew mixing with the metallic tang of blood. A faint hum of Krelth ships patrolling above ground reverberated through the walls, a constant reminder of the invaders' dominance. Around a makeshift campfire, the survivors sat in tense silence. This isn't living, muttered a burly man named Cole Vargas, a former dock worker with a scar running down his cheek. They don't just kill us, they break us. Did you see what they did to that camp in Queens? Burned the whole thing to the ground. Men, women, kids, didn't matter to them. Lena looked away, her jaw tight. I was there. My sister. She... Her voice cracked, and she buried her face in her hands. Drake stepped forward. We've all lost people, he said firmly. But sitting here mourning them won't bring them back. If we're going to make a difference, we need a plan. Cole snorted bitterly. A plan? Against them? Did you forget what happened when the army tried to fight back? They didn't last a day, Captain. A day. Because the army fought them on their terms, Drake countered, his voice rising. We don't have their tech or their firepower, but we've got something they don't. Ingenuity, resourcefulness, the element of surprise. Lena wiped her eyes and looked up. You mean guerrilla tactics? Drake nodded. Exactly. Hit-and-run attacks, sabotage. We don't need to beat them outright. We just need to make them bleed. Enough to show the others we're not as weak as they think. As they spoke, another survivor entered the tunnel. Marcus Brandt, a wiry man with sharp eyes, carried a stolen Krelth datapad. His hands were trembling. Captain, you need to see this, Marcus said, his voice tight with urgency. Drake took the pad and studied the alien symbols displayed on its screen. Marcus translated, his voice shaky. It's a report. They're processing humans, taking them to camps outside the cities. It says here they're evaluating genetic viability. Cole frowned. What the hell does that mean? It means they're deciding who lives and who dies, Marcus said grimly. The ones they think are useful, they enslave. The rest, they're exterminating. Lena gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. We can't let them. Drake's grip on the pad tightened. They think they can play God with us, but they've underestimated what desperate people can do. Marcus, can you access their transport schedules? Marcus nodded hesitantly. I think so. Why? Because we're going to hit them where it hurts. Drake's eyes burned with resolve. We're going to take out one of their transport convoys. The plan was simple, but risky. Ambush a convoy transporting humans to a Krelth camp. The survivors spent the next few hours scavenging for supplies, homemade explosives, scraps of metal to reinforce their weapons, anything they could use to level the playing field. As they worked, Lena approached Drake. Do you think this will even make a difference? She asked quietly. Drake paused, looking at her. It's not about winning the war in one move. It's about showing people we can fight back. If we can save even a handful of those people, it's worth it. Lena nodded, her eyes glistening. Okay, I'm in. The ambush was brutal. The Krelth convoy rolled through the crumbling streets in sleek, hovering vehicles, each flanked by armed drones. The survivors had rigged an abandoned overpass with explosives, detonating it as the convoy passed underneath. The explosion was deafening, sending rubble raining down on the aliens. Drake and his team sprang from cover, weapons blazing. The battle was chaotic and desperate. Human rifles against alien energy weapons, ingenuity against overwhelming power. Lena took down a drone with a well-placed shot, while Cole tackled a Krelth soldier, smashing its helmet with a metal pipe. Amid the carnage, Drake managed to open one of the transport vehicles. Inside were dozens of terrified humans, their faces hollow and gaunt. You're safe now, Drake said, helping them out. Stay low and follow us. By the time the dust settled, the convoy was in ruins. The survivors had taken losses. 3 of their own lay dead, but they'd saved over 50 captives. As they retreated into the shadows, Drake turned to his battered group. This is just the beginning, he said, his voice steady despite the weight of their losses. We've shown them we won't go quietly. Now we show the world. Above them, the Krelth ships continued their unrelenting patrols. But for the first time, the survivors felt something they hadn't dared to in days. Hope. The stolen Krelth scout ship was a cramped, cold nightmare of a vessel. Its angular interior was illuminated by dim, blue-green lights, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The hum of alien engines filled the air, a constant reminder that humanity was far from mastering this technology. Captain Elias Drake sat in the cockpit, gripping the unfamiliar controls. His shoulders were tense, his eyes fixed on the endless expanse of stars outside. Beside him, Lena Carver fidgeted nervously, glancing between the ship's blinking displays and the growing silence between them. You sure this is a good idea? Lena asked finally. Drake exhaled through his nose. Good ideas went out the window the moment they invaded. Now we're working with desperate ones. Lena stared at him, her brow furrowed. And what if this is a trap? What if those signals aren't from other survivors, but... Then we die, Drake interrupted, his voice flat. He softened when he saw her expression. But if they're not? If there are other civilizations out there fighting back, we can't afford not to try. The signal had come from deep space, a faint, fractured broadcast encoded in a format the Resistance couldn't decipher. What they could understand were the images embedded in it, scenes of alien cities burning, of Krelth soldiers dragging reptilian creatures into chains. For Drake, it had been both a warning and a glimmer of hope. If the Krelth were enslaving other species, maybe, just maybe, they'd find allies among the ruins. Hours passed in tense silence as the ship approached the source of the signal, Valtra, a desolate, crater-riddled planet wreathed in dark clouds. The atmosphere shimmered with electric storms, creating a haunting spectacle. Cole Vargas, his massive frame hunched in the tight quarters, peered through the viewport. "Looks like hell," he muttered. "Then we'll fit right in," Lena quipped, though her voice lacked its usual sharpness. Drake checked the sensors. "There's a landing zone near what looks like a wrecked facility. We'll start there." The ship touched down with a bone-jarring thud. As the ramp lowered, the stench of sulfur and decay hit them like a wall. The landscape was barren, dotted with jagged rock formations that seemed to claw at the swirling skies. Drake led the way, his weapon drawn. Lena followed, clutching her rifle tightly, with Cole bringing up the rear. The oppressive silence was broken only by the distant rumble of thunder. They didn't have to search long. The first bodies they found were skeletal, their flesh melted away by what looked like acid. Chains were still fastened to their limbs, linking them to a toppled column. Lena knelt beside one of the corpses, her face pale. "They didn't just kill them, they made them suffer." Cole spat on the ground. "Bastards!" "Keep moving," Drake ordered, though his voice was tight. "We didn't come here to mourn." The facility was in ruins, its metallic walls scorched and riddled with holes. Inside, the air was stifling, thick with the metallic tang of blood and rust. They found the survivors, huddled in a corner of what had once been a processing chamber. There were 6 of them, towering reptilian creatures with scales the color of ash. Their eyes glinted with a mixture of fear and defiance. One of them, a scarred warrior with a broken horn, rose unsteadily to his feet, clutching a jagged piece of metal as a weapon. "Stay back," he growled in a guttural voice. Drake raised his hands slowly. "We're not with the Krelth. We're human." The warrior's eyes narrowed. "Human. Another victim species." "Maybe," Drake said. "But we're also fighting back." The warrior snorted, though his grip on the makeshift weapon relaxed. "Fighting back? With what? Sticks and stones?" "With whatever it takes," Drake replied firmly. "We've already hit them on Earth, freed our people, and now we're looking for others like us. Others who want to see the Krelth burn." The warrior studied him for a long moment before lowering his weapon. "I am Kyle of the Joran, and if you truly mean to fight the Krelth, then you may count on me." The next encounter was even more harrowing. In the bowels of the facility, they found a Talon engineer, a spindly insectoid creature with translucent wings, hooked up to a Krelth control node. The alien's multifaceted eyes flickered weakly as it muttered in its own language. "It's still alive," Lena said, horrified. Kyle's lip curled in disgust. "The Talon! The Krelth keep them alive as living tools. Their minds are adaptable." Drake knelt beside the creature. "Can you hear me?" The Talon's head jerked slightly. Its voice was faint but discernible. "Freedom, or death." Drake nodded grimly. We'll give you both if that's what you want. But if you're willing to fight... The Talon's wings twitched. Fight. Always fight. As they left the ruins, their group larger but heavier with the weight of what they'd seen, Drake felt the stirrings of something he hadn't dared to hope for. Lena glanced at him. Do you think this is enough? Drake looked at the scarred Zoran and the frail Talion, both walking beside them with determined strides. No, but it's a start. Above them, the electric storms raged, a fitting backdrop for the tempest building within. Humanity had taken its first step into a galaxy of pain and defiance. The stolen Krelth scout ship drifted silently through the void, its hull marred with scars from countless battles. Inside, it was quiet, except for the faint hum of alien machinery and the occasional murmur of voices. The survivors, human and alien alike, were gathered in the ship's central chamber, a cramped, circular room illuminated by dim, bioluminescent panels. Captain Elias Drake stood at the center, his weathered face etched with focus. He had always carried the weight of leadership heavily, but now, with the fate of not just Earth, but perhaps other enslaved species at stake, that weight threatened to crush him. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each person who had entrusted their lives, and their futures, to him. Lena Carver sat on a crate to his left, her rifle resting against her knee. She was sharpening a blade, her movements methodical, her face set in grim determination. There was a sharpness to Lena, born of loss and tempered by survival. Her hazel eyes had grown harder since their first battle, but there was still a flicker of warmth when she looked at the others. Across from her, Cole Vargas leaned against the wall, his muscular frame seemingly relaxed, though his clenched fists betrayed his tension. Cole was a man of action, unyielding in the face of adversity, but haunted by the lives he couldn't save. Kyle, the scarred Zoran warrior, stood near the room's edge. His massive reptilian form was imposing, his scales glinting dully in the artificial light. Despite his alien features, the grief in his eyes was unmistakably human. He had lost his people to the Krelth, his scars a testament to battles fought and lost. The Talon engineer, whom they had started calling Tick, was perched on a nearby console. Its fragile body and twitching wings gave it an almost ethereal appearance, but the fire in its voice when it spoke of vengeance revealed an unbreakable will. Drake took a deep breath and turned to the holographic map projected above the console. It showed Earth and its orbiting Krelth fleets, along with a series of red dots marking key Krelth installations. "We've seen what they can do," he began, his voice steady but heavy. "We've felt their cruelty firsthand. They don't just kill, they dominate, erase. They want us to be afraid, to believe there's no hope." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "But we've proven they can bleed, and if they can bleed, they can fall." Kyle stepped forward, his deep voice rumbling through the room. "The Krelth are overconfident. They see us as vermin, not as warriors. That arrogance can be exploited." Tick clicked its mandibles thoughtfully. "They rely on their control nodes. Disabling one disrupts their operations, but only temporarily. For true victory, we must destroy their core nexus." "Where is it?" Lena asked, her voice sharp. Tick's wings fluttered uneasily. "On their flagship, a fortress in orbit, heavily guarded." Cole let out a low whistle. "We're supposed to take out a fortress? With what, hope and duct tape?" Drake ignored the remark, his eyes still on the map. "Not directly. We create chaos first, disrupt their supply lines, sabotage their facilities, make them spread themselves thin." Over the next hours, they worked tirelessly to craft a plan. Lena cataloged their meager arsenal, a handful of human weapons, scavenged alien tech, and a few homemade explosives. Kyle and Tick outlined the Krelth's weaknesses, describing their reliance on centralized communication and their vulnerability to rapid, coordinated strikes. Each person brought something to the table. Lena's resourcefulness, Cole's brute strength, Kyle's strategic mind, Tick's technical expertise. It all began to weave together into a coherent strategy. As the team worked, Drake couldn't help but notice the quiet moments that spoke volumes about the people around him. Lena paused in her work to pull a photo from her pocket, a faded image of her sister, smiling brightly. She stared at it for a moment before tucking it away, her jaw tight. Cole muttered under his breath as he adjusted a makeshift weapon, frustration etched across his face. Damn aliens think they can break us. We'll show them what humans are made of. Kyle sat in silent contemplation, his claws resting on his knees. His eyes were distant, as though he were reliving the destruction of his homeworld. Tick worked ceaselessly, its delicate hands moving with precise efficiency. When Drake approached, the Talon glanced up, its voice tinged with quiet resolve. I was a builder once. Now I tear down what enslaves. By the time the plan was finalized, the team was exhausted but resolute. They would strike at 3 key targets: a supply depot, a drone production facility, and a command relay station. Each strike would weaken the Krelth's grip and pave the way for the final assault on their flagship. Drake gathered everyone together one last time before they set out. I'm not going to lie to you, he said. This is going to be brutal. Some of us might not make it, but every step we take brings us closer to freedom, not just for us, but for everyone the Krelth have enslaved. He looked at each of them, his voice softening. We fight for those who can't, for the ones we've lost, for the ones still waiting to be saved. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with unspoken emotions. Each person carried their own pain, their own reasons for fighting. But in that moment, they were united. Above them, the stars stretched endlessly, indifferent to their struggles. But within that stolen ship, among the battered and broken, a spark of defiance burned brighter than ever. The stolen scout ship skimmed low over the surface of a barren moon, its engines humming with a faint whine. Inside, the team gathered around the central console, bathed in the soft blue glow of the tactical display. The air was tense, thick with unspoken doubts, and a shared determination that pushed them forward. The holographic map displayed their 3 objectives: the Krelth Supply Depot, the drone production facility, and the command relay station. Each was critical to the enemy's operations and heavily guarded. Taking all 3 out would cripple the Krelth's control over the system, but the stakes were immense. We'll divide into 2 teams, Captain Elias Drake began, his voice steady as he pointed to the hologram. Team 1 will hit the supply depot and the relay station. Team 2 takes the drone factory. He glanced around, gauging their reactions. Timing is everything. If one group falls behind, it jeopardizes the entire operation. And we'll be outnumbered, Lena Carver added, her sharp tone betraying her nerves. By a lot. Kyle, the Zoran warrior, rumbled in agreement. We won't win by brute force. Precision and deception will be our greatest weapons. Tick, perched on the console, clicked its mandibles thoughtfully. The Krelth rely on their technology as much as their numbers. If we can disrupt their systems, even for a moment, it will tilt the odds in our favor. Drake nodded. Exactly. That's where Tick comes in. You'll rig the command relay with an EMP device, shutting down their comms temporarily. That'll give us enough time to hit the other targets. Cole Vargas crossed his arms, his rough voice cutting through the room. What about the drone factory? We take that out, and they lose their reinforcements. That's the wild card, Drake admitted. The facility is the most heavily defended, but if we can overload their production core, it'll cause a chain reaction. We'll destroy the entire operation in one hit. The room fell silent as the enormity of the mission settled over them. Drake leaned forward, his hands braced on the console. Look, I won't pretend this isn't risky. It is. But every time we've fought, we've shown the Krelth something they weren't ready for. Resistance. They think they've broken us. Let's prove them wrong. Lena smirked faintly, though her eyes were hard. Let's make them regret ever coming to Earth. Team 1, led by Drake and Lena, landed near the supply depot. The facility loomed ahead, a sprawling compound of alien architecture surrounded by glowing energy barriers. Patrols moved in precise patterns, their movements too synchronized to be anything but algorithmic. They're predictable, Drake muttered, watching from the ridge. That's their weakness. Tick had provided a device that could disrupt the energy barriers for exactly 3 minutes. It was a narrow window, but Drake's team was used to working with nothing. Move fast, hit hard, he told Lena as they descended toward the facility. The plan worked like clockwork until it didn't. Inside the depot, the team encountered heavier resistance than anticipated. Krelth soldiers poured into the corridors, their glowing weapons lighting up the dark interior. Lena's pulse quickened as she fired back, her heart pounding in her chest. "We're out of time!" she shouted as more soldiers closed in. Drake gritted his teeth. "Keep moving! The explosives are set!" The team barely made it out before the charges detonated, a deafening explosion ripping through the facility. Flames licked the sky, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. Meanwhile, Team 2, Cole, Kale, and Tick, approached the drone factory. The plan hinged on Kale's strength and Tick's ingenuity. The Talon scurried into the main control room, its delicate hands moving with alien precision as it worked to override the factory's systems. Kyle stood guard, his hulking frame blocking the doorway, while Cole planted explosives along the assembly line. "This place gives me the creeps," Cole muttered, glancing at the rows of dormant drones. "Like they're watching us." Kyle didn't respond, his sharp eyes scanning the corridors. "Stay focused. They'll be here soon." As if on cue, alarms blared, and the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the halls. "Tick, hurry up!" Cole barked. "Almost done," Tick replied, its voice strained. "Core overload initiated." Kyle grabbed Tick just as the first wave of Krelth soldiers arrived. "Time to go!" The team sprinted out of the facility, the ground shaking as the core erupted in a cascade of light and energy. Back on the scout ship, the two teams regrouped, battered but victorious. The 3 destroyed facilities had left the Krelth scrambling, their movements disorganized, and their reinforcements delayed. Lena leaned against the wall, her breathing heavy. "We actually did it," she said, a hint of disbelief in her voice. Drake managed a faint smile. "This is just the beginning." Kale crossed his arms, his scarred face serious. "The Krelth will retaliate. Hard." "Let them," Cole said, his voice defiant. "We've shown we're not just prey anymore." Drake stood at the viewport, staring out at the stars. The victory was a small one, but it was enough to ignite something bigger. Hope. Humanity wasn't just surviving, they were fighting back. The captain turned to his crew, his voice steady and resolute. "We've drawn blood. Now we keep striking until they fall." The tension in the room was palpable, the weight of their mission hanging heavy. But in the eyes of his team, Drake saw something unshakable: determination. For the first time, humanity wasn't looking up at the stars in fear. They were looking forward, ready to rise. The Krelth's response came swiftly, as Drake and the others had anticipated. Within hours of the successful strikes, their stolen ship was intercepted by enemy patrols, forcing them to jump between asteroid belts and dead planets to evade detection. Every escape tightened the noose around their operation, and the crew began to feel the weight of their choices. But each moment of pursuit also brought them closer to their ultimate goal: the Krelth flagship, where their command nexus pulsed like a beating heart. The crew was gathered in the scout ship's central chamber, its dim lighting casting long shadows on their faces. The holographic display of the flagship spun slowly before them, its vast bulk bristling with weaponry. It was a fortress, orbiting above a ruined colony, surrounded by a fleet of smaller vessels. "This is it," Captain Elias Drake said, his voice quiet but firm. "The command nexus. We take it out, and we cripple their ability to coordinate. They'll still have their numbers, but they'll lose their edge." "It's suicide," Lena Carver said bluntly, her hazel eyes locked on the spinning hologram. "Even if we can get close, how do we breach it? That thing's got more firepower than anything we've faced." Kyle stepped forward, his reptilian form looming over the others. "The Krelth's strength is also their weakness. They rely on their systems, interconnected, precise. If we can infiltrate and overload their core, the resulting chain reaction will destroy the entire ship." Cole Vargas leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "And leave us stuck in the middle of a firestorm. Great plan." Tick clicked its mandibles, its voice calm. "We can use their own technology against them. The scout ship's cloaking field is limited, but it should get us close enough to board. From there, we divide and conquer." Drake nodded. "2 teams. One to plant the charges in the Nexus, the other to cause as much chaos as possible. Draw their forces away." "I'll take the explosives," Lena volunteered, her voice steady despite the weight of the task. Drake hesitated, his eyes meeting hers. "You sure?" She nodded. "I'm not letting them win, not after everything we've been through." As the plan took shape, the tension in the ship grew palpable. Each member of the crew prepared in their own way, their emotions raw and unfiltered. Lena sat in a quiet corner, disassembling and reassembling her rifle with practiced precision. She paused occasionally to glance at the photo of her sister, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You'll get her back," Cole said, breaking the silence. He leaned against the bulkhead, his gaze distant. "We'll make sure of it." Lena didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice was soft. "You don't know that. None of us do." Cole's jaw tightened. "Then we make sure they remember us, that they know humanity didn't go down without a fight." Kyle and Tick worked tirelessly to modify the scout ship's systems, the Talon's delicate hands moving with an almost frantic urgency. "Do you ever doubt?" Kyle asked suddenly, his deep voice breaking the silence. Tick paused, its translucent wings trembling. "Doubt is a luxury. We survive or we fail. There is no middle ground." Kyle's clawed fingers tapped against the console. "Spoken like a warrior." Spoken like someone with nothing left to lose. Tick replied, its tone unreadable. In the cockpit, Drake stared out at the stars, the weight of his decisions pressing down on him. Every choice he'd made had brought them closer to this moment, but the cost was immeasurable. Lena entered, her steps quiet. You okay? Drake didn't look at her. It doesn't matter if I'm okay. What matters is that we finish this. She hesitated before stepping closer. You're allowed to feel, even if it's just for a second. Drake finally turned to her, his face etched with exhaustion. I feel enough to know this. If we don't win, none of this will matter. Not Earth, not the Zoran, not any of it. We have to be more than what they think we are. We have to be unstoppable. The plan was simple in theory, impossible in practice. The scout ship would use its limited cloaking to slip past the Krelth fleet and dock with the flagship. From there, the teams would split. Team 1, led by Lena, would plant the charges in the Nexus core, triggering a catastrophic chain reaction. Team 2, led by Drake, would create chaos in the lower decks, drawing attention away from the core. The timing had to be perfect. One misstep, and the entire operation would fall apart. As they neared the Krelth fleet, the tension on the ship became suffocating. Every moment felt like an eternity, every glance a silent goodbye. Drake gathered the crew one last time before the mission began. This is it, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. We've fought our way here, through everything they've thrown at us. They wanted us broken. They wanted us afraid. But we're still standing. He looked at each of them, his gaze lingering on Lena, Cole, Kyle, and Tick. Whatever happens next, we've already won in one way. We've shown them that humanity isn't just a word. It's a force. Lena smirked faintly. Let's make it a force they never forget. The ship slipped through the fleet's defenses, its cloaking field flickering under the strain. The flagship loomed ahead, a massive shadow against the stars. Drake clenched his fists, his heart pounding. The endgame had begun. The stars streaked past the scout ship as it sailed deeper into the heart of Krelth space. Every heartbeat felt louder than the hum of the engines, every breath more strained than the last. The final preparations were in motion. There was no turning back. The Krelth flagship loomed ahead, a hulking mass of dark metal and pulsing energy. It was a fortress in every sense, towering, imposing, and impregnable. But to the crew of the scout ship, it was nothing more than a target. Inside the cramped bridge, Drake stood in front of the controls, his fingers dancing over the consoles. Beside him, Lena worked feverishly, making last-minute checks on the weapons and communications systems. The tension between them was palpable, an unspoken understanding of what lay ahead. We've got one shot at this, Lena said, her voice clipped. We can't afford to mess up. Drake glanced at her, his eyes steely. We won't. We've come too far to fail now. Behind them, Cole cracked his knuckles and loaded his rifle. The way he moved, fluid and controlled, was the calm before the storm. Just point me at the enemy, he muttered, his voice low but full of certainty. We'll handle the rest. Kyle and Tick were in the engineering bay, preparing the explosives. The Zoran warrior's massive form was a constant presence, his yellow eyes reflecting the grim determination that burned within him. Tick, delicate but focused, was meticulously double-checking the EMP devices and explosives they would use to disable the Krelth's internal systems. Every wire, every circuit, had to be perfect. We'll need to breach their shields to get the explosives inside, Kyle's voice was a low rumble. "There are weak points in their hull, just under the main hangar. That's our best shot." "We've got this," Tick added. "I've made some adjustments to the EMPs. They'll disable their systems for a full 5 minutes, just enough time for us to plant the charges and get out." Drake turned to Lena, a quiet look of determination in his eyes. "We hit them hard and fast. Once we're in, we don't stop until the core is destroyed." Lena nodded. "Agreed. No hesitation." The tension grew thick as the minutes ticked away. They were mere moments away from entering the Krelth flagship's immediate vicinity, and the silence on the bridge was oppressive. There was no more talking, only the mechanical rhythm of preparation. "Approaching docking bay," Lena announced, her voice a clear contrast to the unease that gripped the crew. "Brace yourselves." The ship rocked slightly as it breached the Krelth's outer defenses, the cloaking device flickering in and out as it was tested by the flagship's sensor grid. Drake's heart raced as they navigated through the fleet, the odds of their detection growing with every passing second. "We can't afford to be detected," Cole said. "If we don't make it to that hangar, this entire plan's over before it starts." "Stay focused," Drake responded, his voice unwavering. "Once we're in, we make our move. Fast and quiet. Remember, the EMPs will disable their comms, but not for long. We don't have time to waste." Tick's voice echoed through the ship's comms. "EMP activation successful. The Krelth can't call for reinforcements yet." Drake's fingers tightened on the controls. "Everyone ready?" "Let's do this," Kyle growled, and it was the final catalyst the team needed. The ship lurched as it docked inside the Krelth flagship's enormous hangar. The walls vibrated with the weight of the alien structure, and the sound of distant Krelth voices echoed through the hallways. Drake's heart pounded in his chest, but he pushed it aside. They had no time to waste. "We move on my mark," Drake ordered, his voice low but commanding. "Lena, you're on point. Cole, you take the rear. Kyle and Tick, you follow me." The team moved as one, silent, swift, and precise. They slipped through the hangar's shadows, blending into the darkness. The Krelth soldiers, unaware of the breach, continued their routines, oblivious to the chaos that was about to unfold. 5 minutes, Drake muttered as they made their way deeper into the flagship. The narrow corridors twisted and turned, each step bringing them closer to the heart of the ship. The EMPs had done their job, and the Krelth's internal communications were down. But that advantage would only last for so long. Kyle's massive form moved with surprising speed, his eyes scanning the darkened halls for any signs of movement. "There," he said, pointing to a security door. "That's the core access." Lena approached it, crouching low to avoid detection. She planted a small charge and moved back quickly. "Ready?" she said, stepping away. "Stand back," Drake ordered. The explosion was deafening, the blast sending the door crumpling inward. Inside, the Krelth's Nexus core glowed ominously, surrounded by a network of alien terminals. The core was the lifeblood of the flagship, controlling everything from the weapons systems to the life support. If they destroyed it, the entire ship would fall apart. "This is it," Drake said, his voice resolute. "Lena, you plant the charges. Cole, keep an eye out. Kale, Tick, we'll cover you." Lena stepped forward, her hands steady as she set the charges. The countdown began. "Charges set. We have 5 minutes." But as the seconds ticked away, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. Krelth soldiers had caught wind of their presence. "We're out of time," Drake muttered. "Fight our way out. Keep moving." The ensuing battle was brutal. Krelth soldiers flooded the room, their weapons firing at blinding speed. Cole opened fire, his shots cutting through the enemy ranks with lethal precision. Kyle barreled forward, tearing through Krelth soldiers with ease. Lena moved like a shadow, her rifle a blur as she picked off any threat that came too close. Drake stood at the heart of the chaos, his eyes never leaving Lena. He trusted her. He trusted all of them. But the time was slipping away. 10 seconds! Lena shouted. "Get ready to move!" As the countdown hit 0, the charges detonated, the core erupting in a violent flash of light. The flagship shook violently, the ship's systems faltering. Alarms blared, and the Krelth's once steady operations devolved into chaos. Drake didn't waste a second. "Move! Now!" With the ship crumbling around them, the crew ran toward the exit, barely escaping the blast. The Krelth flagship was doomed, its heart destroyed. But the battle wasn't over yet. They had to escape before the Krelth brought everything down on them. The final preparations were in place. The beginning of the end had arrived. The Krelth flagship was dying. The massive vessel, once a symbol of invincibility, now shuddered under the weight of its destruction. Flames erupted along its hull, and sections of the ship began to break apart as the charges detonated, cascading shockwaves of fire and debris through its core. The core itself, the heart of the Krelth's command nexus, had been reduced to a smoking wreck, sending tremors through the entire fleet. Inside the doomed ship, Drake's team fought tooth and nail to survive. "We're almost there!" Drake shouted over the deafening alarms, his voice cutting through the chaos. The corridors of the flagship were bathed in an eerie red light, flashing with warning signs and explosions. "Keep moving!" The team sprinted through the hallways, their breath ragged as they pushed forward. Behind them, the ship's systems were collapsing, its once imposing weapons systems now flickering and going offline. But the Krelth were relentless, and as the crew reached the docking bay, they realized the final escape would not come easy. The hangar doors ahead were wide open, but Krelth soldiers poured in from the shadows, desperate to stop the humans from escaping. The last stand was upon them. "Go! I'll cover you!" Lena shouted, her eyes burning with resolve. She was positioned at the rear, firing her weapon at the advancing Krelth soldiers, picking them off with pinpoint precision. "Lena, no!" Drake shouted, turning to her, his heart skipping a beat. "We don't have time." But she wasn't listening. Her eyes locked on him for a moment, as if trying to say everything she couldn't with words. "You have to live, Elias. All of you. Get back to Earth." The realization hit him like a gut punch. "Lena, you don't—" But she was already moving. A grenade landed at her feet, and without a moment's hesitation, she lunged toward it, diving to cover the blast. The explosion was deafening, a bright flash of light swallowing everything around her. The shockwave knocked Drake off his feet, but when he looked up, Lena was gone. Tears blurred his vision, but there was no time to mourn. The Krelth were still coming. "We can't stop here! We fight for Lena! We fight for Earth!" he yelled. The remaining members of the team pressed on, firing and dodging through the hallways. They reached the escape pod just as the ship lurched violently. Kyle, his body a shield for the others, threw open the pod's hatch. "In!" he roared, his voice cutting through the chaos. Cole, his face bloodied but unbowed, was the first to enter, followed by Tick, who remained oddly calm despite the carnage around them. Drake hesitated for a moment, his eyes scanning the shattered remains of their mission. His team, his family, had made it this far. But now, with the loss of Lena, they would carry that weight forever. He stepped into the pod last, slamming the hatch closed as the pod's engines fired to life. Outside, the Krelth flagship exploded in a brilliant cascade of fire and metal, tearing apart in the wake of the EMP's disruption and the core's destruction. "We're free," Drake muttered, staring out of the small viewport as the Krelth fleet scattered in disarray. 200 years later, the skies above Earth had changed. Where once they had been filled with the shadow of alien invaders, now they were clear. The Krelth were no more. The war had ended, but the sacrifices were too many to count. Drake stood at the edge of a great memorial, his eyes reflecting the towering statues of the fallen heroes, the men and women who had given everything to ensure humanity's survival. "You wanted to build something new," Cole said, stepping up beside him. His voice had matured over the years, the weight of their experiences shaping him into something greater than he had been. "Did we?" Drake turned to him, his face weathered but resolute. "We did, Cole. It's just, we couldn't build it without the foundation they gave us." Behind them, the memorial stretched high into the sky, an eternal reminder of the price humanity had paid. Each name carved into the stone represented a life lost, a person who had fought for a world that would never forget. The rebuilding had been slow. The initial years were filled with grief, uncertainty, and fear of what might come next. The scars of war, both physical and emotional, had run deep. But the survivors, those who had been at the heart of the war, had learned to lead with compassion and determination. Kyle had become one of the foremost leaders of the new Human Council, helping to unite the scattered remnants of humanity's defense forces into a singular, cohesive unit. His strength was legendary, but it was his wisdom in understanding the value of cooperation and unity that truly led them to victory. Tick, ever the quiet genius, had worked tirelessly to reverse engineer alien technology, ensuring that humanity would never again be caught off guard. The advances in medicine, engineering, and energy were unprecedented, all born from the knowledge they had stolen from the Krelth. The rise of the new human civilization was founded on principles of mutual respect, equality, and the belief that no race, no species, should ever hold dominion over another. They had seen firsthand the destruction that blind ambition could cause. They would never allow it to happen again. But the most crucial lesson they carried was this: strength lies in unity. The sacrifices made by Lena and countless others had taught them that victory was never just about defeating the enemy. It was about preserving the humanity they fought for. Drake stood on the podium at the dedication ceremony, the wind tugging at his jacket. He had aged, but his resolve had only deepened. He gazed out at the crowd, at the faces of the survivors, the families of those who had been lost, the children who would never know the horrors of the war. "Today, we honor the sacrifices that made this moment possible," Drake's voice rang out, carrying across the plaza. "We honor the memory of those we've lost, and we celebrate the future we've forged together." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "We will never forget what happened here." The cost was high, but the reward was worth it. We fought for a world where no one is subjugated, where no one suffers the tyranny of an alien race, or anyone else. We fought for a future that belongs to us all. The crowd erupted in applause, but Drake stood still, feeling the presence of those who were no longer with them, Lena and all the others who had given everything. He knew, deep in his soul, that they had won not just for themselves, but for every future generation of humanity. The scars would remain, but so would the strength that came from overcoming them. And humanity would rise from the ashes, forged in the fires of sacrifice and the will to never give up. The Krelth had underestimated them. They had seen humanity as a fragile, insignificant species, easy to break. But they had been wrong. Humanity was not fragile. It was unyielding, and that was why they would never fall again. And with that, Drake turned back to the monument, the names of the fallen immortalized in stone, and walked away, into the future, carrying the memory of those who had sacrificed everything for the world they had saved.